The hospital was unusually quiet that morning, a rare calm before the storm of a day that promised endless emergencies and busy corridors. A young nurse, barely past her mid-20s, walked through the sliding doors, her worn-out sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor. She carried a small backpack and a reusable coffee mug, her hair tied neatly to keep it out of the way. Her name wasn't important to most people in the hospital, and she liked it that way. She preferred being unnoticed, blending into the crowd, helping where she was needed without expecting recognition. She had just finished a long night shift, one that left her legs aching and her mind foggy, but she didn't complain. It was part of the job, part of the life she had chosen. Nursing wasn't about glory or rewards. It was about the small victories, the quiet moments of making someone's day better, or in some cases, saving a life. She had always felt a strong sense of purpose in her work, and mornings like this reminded her why she continued despite the exhaustion. As she approached the nurses' station, the intercom crackled to life with an urgent announcement. The blood bank needed donors immediately. A young child in the pediatric wing was in critical condition, and the hospital's supply was dangerously low. Many nurses and staff members exchanged glances, some hesitant, some determined. She paused for a moment, gripping her coffee mug tighter. She could feel her pulse quicken, not out of fear but a sense of responsibility. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and volunteered. The exhaustion in her body didn't matter. Someone's life depended on her action. The nurse walked to the donation area, a small room tucked away near the back of the hospital. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and metal, a smell she had grown accustomed to over the years. She was greeted by a cheerful phlebotomist who guided her to the reclining chair. As she settled in, she felt the familiar mix of nerves and resolve. The needle prick was sharp but brief, and then the slow, steady flow of blood reminded her that she was contributing to something far bigger than herself. While she sat there, she noticed the anxious father waiting nearby. He was in his late 30s, dressed casually in a way that suggested both style and practicality. His eyes were fixed on the door to the pediatric wing, flicking up occasionally to glance at his daughter. The little girl, no more than 6, was seated in a wheelchair with an oxygen tube under her nose. Her eyes were wide and fearful, clinging to a small stuffed animal. The father's hands trembled slightly as he held hers, his voice soft as he whispered reassurances she barely heard. The nurse didn't interact with them directly yet. Her focus remained on the task at hand, but she couldn't help noticing the intensity of his concern and the tenderness in his gestures. The room felt suspended in time as she completed the donation. The phlebotomist carefully removed the needle and applied a small bandage. She smiled faintly, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had done her part, and that alone was enough. She stood, stretching her arms, and gave a polite nod to the father, who offered a weary but grateful smile in return. She didn't linger, not because she didn't care, but because her mind was already moving on to the next patient, the next task, the next life she might touch. Walking back through the hospital corridors, she reflected on the simplicity of the act. It was just giving blood, a small gesture, but in that moment it was life-changing for someone else. She didn't consider the possibility that the man she had seen, the father of the child she had helped indirectly, was not just an ordinary person. He was someone who carried the weight of immense responsibility outside of this hospital room. She had no idea that he was a millionaire, a single dad struggling to balance a high-powered career with the demands of parenthood, and that her simple act of kindness would ripple through his life in unexpected ways. The father, meanwhile, watched as she walked away. He had learned her name from the staff and felt a deep sense of gratitude that words could not fully express. In that brief encounter, he realized she had gone out of her way, sacrificing her own comfort and rest to help a stranger. His daughter's life was safer now, and he knew it was because of someone who didn't even know him. He felt a mixture of relief, admiration, and something else he hadn't expected, an almost instinctive respect for her character. Back in the nurse's station, she resumed her duties with the same quiet dedication she brought to every shift. She helped an elderly patient to breakfast, checked the vitals of several recovering patients, and offered a kind word or gentle touch where it was needed. She didn't seek recognition, but the small smiles and sighs of relief she received were enough to keep her going. Every action, no matter how small, felt meaningful. Later that day, during a brief break in the staff lounge, she sipped her coffee and stared out of the window. The city was waking up, cars honking, people rushing to work, children heading to school. She thought about the child she had helped indirectly, imagining her bright eyes and fragile smile. Even though she had only spent a few minutes donating blood, she felt connected to that child's life in a profound way. It was a connection that required no words, no acknowledgement, just the simple truth of human kindness. Unbeknownst to her, the father had returned home with his daughter, the little girl now stable and resting. He couldn't stop thinking about the nurse, the young woman who had given so freely without expecting anything in return. In his world of business meetings, boardrooms, and financial pressures, acts like hers were rare and almost miraculous. He found himself wondering about her life, her dreams, and the quiet strength that had compelled her to act without hesitation. Over the next few days, she continued her routine, unaware of the subtle but growing impact her action had created. The father, in contrast, began quietly asking hospital staff about her. He didn't want to intrude or make her uncomfortable, but he felt an urge to meet her again, to thank her properly, and perhaps in some unspoken way, to know the person whose kindness had touched his family so deeply. Each morning, she walked the same hospital corridors, greeted the same colleagues, and tended to patients with unwavering dedication. She faced long hours, emotional stress, and occasional moments of doubt, but she always returned to the same guiding principle: help where you can, give where you can, and don't expect anything in return. Her life was simple, yet purposeful, and she took pride in the small, meaningful ways she could make a difference. The father's quiet search for her began to take shape. He spoke with a few nurses and hospital administrators, piecing together details of her shifts and routines. He learned about her commitment, her humility, and her reputation as someone who consistently went above and beyond. The more he learned, the more he admired her, not just for saving his daughter's life indirectly, but for the character she displayed every day. It was clear she had chosen a path of service and kindness, and he found himself inspired by her example. Meanwhile, she continued her work, oblivious to the attention she was drawing from someone whose life circumstances were dramatically different from hers. She encountered families in distress, patients in pain, and colleagues seeking advice. In each encounter, she offered empathy and professionalism, never considering that her actions might one day intertwine with the life of the father she had briefly noticed in the hospital. One evening, as she finished another long shift, she walked to the parking lot under the dim glow of streetlights. Her body ached and her mind felt heavy with the day's challenges, but she felt a quiet satisfaction in her heart. She had done her part, given her energy and time, and in return received nothing more than a fleeting smile or a whispered thank you. That was enough. It always had been. At home, she prepared a simple dinner, reflecting on the day's events. She thought about the child who had received the blood she donated, imagining the relief of the parents and the slow, steady recovery that would follow. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her small action had contributed to a life saved. She didn't dwell on the recognition or attention she might receive. Her satisfaction came from knowing she had acted with compassion and integrity. The father, on the other hand, lay awake that night, his thoughts circling around the nurse. He replayed the brief interaction in his mind, analyzing her gestures, her words, her calm demeanor. He realized that he was drawn not only to her selflessness, but to the quiet strength she exhibited. In a world where wealth and status often overshadowed character, her humility and kindness were striking. He felt a growing desire to meet her again, to express his gratitude and perhaps to learn more about the person behind the compassionate actions. Days passed, and life at the hospital continued. The nurse remained focused on her patients, unaware that her simple act of donating blood had set in motion a series of events that would soon change her life in ways she could never imagine. She continued to embody the quiet heroism that defined her, giving her energy, attention, and care to those who needed it most, without expectation, without recognition, and without pause. And so, her life carried on, grounded in compassion, humility, and the daily dedication to helping others. She walked the hospital corridors with purpose, unaware that somewhere, a single father and his young daughter carried her act of kindness in their hearts, a small but powerful thread connecting their lives to hers. That connection, invisible and unassuming, was only the beginning of a story neither of them could yet foresee, a story that would soon unfold in ways that would forever alter the course of their lives. The days that followed the nurse's donation passed like any other. though for the young father and his daughter, they felt like a slow, careful recovery after a storm. The little girl was awake more often now, her fragile body gaining strength, and her eyes occasionally sparkled with curiosity rather than fear. The father remained vigilant, hovering close by, yet he could not help noticing a subtle shift in the air of the hospital. She had given more than blood. She had given a moment of hope that reminded him of what was possible. He returned to his office, a sleek modern space filled with the subtle signs of success. Awards, framed articles, and large windows overlooking the city. Yet all of that felt distant compared to the weight on his mind. His daughter's well-being consumed him, and amidst the paperwork and business calls, he found his thoughts drifting back to the young nurse who had quietly helped them. He had heard only her first name from the hospital staff, a name he repeated silently as if saying it aloud would summon her. Her presence lingered in his mind like a gentle whisper, and he couldn't shake the feeling that meeting her again was more than just courtesy. It felt necessary. Meanwhile, the nurse continued her work with the same quiet intensity she always carried. Her days were filled with long hours, tending to patients of every age and condition, navigating emergencies and mundane checkups alike. She found comfort in routine, in the rhythm of care and the small victories that made the exhaustion worthwhile. Yet amid her busy life, she occasionally thought of the little girl whose life she had touched, wondering if she was sleeping well, if her father's worried eyes were at ease. Even in her limited contact, she felt the ripple of her actions, the unseen impact of a small but meaningful choice. The father began to make discreet inquiries about her schedule. He didn't want to impose, nor did he want her to feel obligated in any way. He simply wanted to understand the person behind the kindness that had so profoundly affected his family. Nurses who had worked alongside her spoke of her dedication, her empathy, and the subtle ways she went above and beyond without ever asking for recognition. It wasn't just her skills, they said it was her heart. The father listened carefully, each word painting a clearer picture of a young woman who lived by quiet principles, who acted without expectation, and whose presence seemed to bring comfort naturally. For her part, the nurse remained unaware of the attention she had drawn. She dealt with the routine chaos of hospital life, juggling patients, paperwork, and the occasional family emergency of her own. Her friends often teased her about being too selfless, but she simply smiled, shrugging off their concerns. Helping people wasn't a choice for her. It was a part of who she was. Each life she touched, even in small ways, mattered. And while she sometimes wondered if she was making a difference, moments like the blood donation reassured her that the work was meaningful. As the days passed, the little girl's recovery progressed steadily. Her laughter, though quiet, began to return, and she showed more interest in the world around her. The father's relief was palpable, yet beneath it was a lingering curiosity about the nurse. He found himself imagining conversations with her, wanting to understand her perspective, her motivations, and the strength that seemed to flow from her effortlessly. He was aware of the unusual nature of his feelings. They were not romantic, not yet, but they were deeply admiring. In his world of calculated decisions and financial strategies, admiration of this kind felt strange, raw, and entirely human. The hospital corridors, familiar and often routine, took on new significance. Each time he walked past a nurse's station or glanced into a patient room, he found himself scanning for her face. It was subtle, almost instinctive, and he chastised himself for it. Yet he couldn't help it. Her presence represented something he rarely experienced in his structured, demanding life. Genuine care that existed for its own sake, without agenda or expectation. He realized that he wanted to know her, not because of her role as a nurse or the act she had performed, but because of the person she seemed to be. One afternoon, the nurse was called to the pediatric wing for routine follow-up checks. She entered the room where the little girl was sitting up in bed, coloring with crayons on a small hospital tray. The father was nearby, reviewing some paperwork but watching his daughter with careful attention. When the nurse approached, the child's face brightened, a small smile spreading across her cheeks. She pointed at the nurse, giggling, and the father looked up, his eyes catching hers briefly. There was an unspoken recognition, a fleeting connection, and the nurse returned a gentle smile, unaware of the weight behind it. They spoke briefly about the child's recovery, the nurse offering advice and reassurance in her calm, confident tone. The father listened attentively, nodding and asking questions, but he did not mention his growing admiration. He simply wanted to understand her better, to learn from her knowledge and perspective. Each word, each gesture felt significant to him, and he found himself lingering longer than necessary, as though the conversation itself was a bridge between worlds. After the checkup, the nurse moved on to her next patient, unaware that the father was making mental notes, planning subtle ways to see her again without disrupting her routine. He wasn't motivated by wealth or status, nor did he wish to impress her with either. He simply wanted to express gratitude, to create a space where their paths might cross again organically. It was a careful, deliberate process, one that required patience and discretion, and he approached it with the same seriousness he applied to all his decisions. Back at her station, the nurse reflected on the day's work. She felt the usual mix of fatigue and fulfillment, her mind cycling through the patients she had attended to and the small victories achieved. She didn't dwell on personal recognition or long-term impact. Her focus remained on the immediate, the tangible, yet without realizing it, she had become a focal point in someone else's life, a symbol of hope, kindness, and unexpected connection. This realization, though not hers yet, would soon play a role in the unfolding story. The father, after leaving the hospital, found himself wandering the city streets with a restless energy. His mind replayed moments with his daughter, the nurse, and the hospital staff, weaving them together into a narrative that was part gratitude, part fascination. He wasn't accustomed to feeling this way. Admiration for someone outside his professional or social circle was unfamiliar, almost disorienting. Yet it was sincere, and it propelled him to act thoughtfully, to seek ways to acknowledge the nurse's impact without overstepping boundaries. Over the following week, the nurse continued her routines, tending to patients, assisting colleagues, and offering kindness wherever she could. She remained modest, often deflecting praise, and her focus never wavered from the task at hand. Her life, though busy and occasionally exhausting, had a rhythm and purpose that grounded her. Each act of care, whether large or small, reinforced her belief in the importance of human connection and empathy. Meanwhile, the father quietly monitored her schedule, learning the patterns and routines that defined her day. He consulted staff discreetly, never seeking to intrude but aiming to understand. His intention was simple: to express genuine gratitude, to acknowledge the difference she had made, and perhaps to build a rapport rooted in mutual respect and shared humanity. The process was slow and deliberate, reflecting the careful balance he maintained in all aspects of his life. As the child continued to recover, she became more energetic and playful. She insisted on showing her drawings to the nurse during each visit, her eyes lighting up with pride. The father observed these interactions closely, noting the warmth and patience the nurse exhibited. It was clear that her impact extended beyond the immediate medical assistance. She fostered emotional reassurance, creating a space where both child and parent felt supported and understood. The nurse, absorbed in her work, noticed the child's progress with satisfaction. She offered encouragement, celebrated small milestones, and provided practical guidance for recovery. Her focus remained on the immediate needs of the patients, yet each interaction carried subtle, lasting effects. Without realizing it, she was shaping experiences, building confidence, and leaving an imprint on lives that extended beyond her immediate perception. The father, reflecting on these interactions, recognized that her actions exemplified qualities he valued but rarely encountered: integrity, compassion, and humility. He found himself drawn to her not because of a dramatic gesture, but because of the consistency and authenticity she displayed in everyday moments. Each observation reinforced his desire to meet her again, to acknowledge her efforts, and to explore a connection that went beyond a single act of kindness. One evening, the nurse left the hospital after a particularly long shift. Her body ached, but her spirit remained resilient. She thought briefly about the child and her father, wondering if their day had gone smoothly and if the child was comfortable and happy. She felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing one has done their best, and she carried that feeling home with her. She had no idea that her small act of donating blood had set in motion a series of events that would soon draw her life into unexpected and meaningful intersections. The father, in contrast, sat in his office late into the night, reviewing plans and emails with a restless mind. Yet every few minutes his thoughts returned to the nurse, to the brief moments of interaction and to the quiet strength she embodied. He realized that his admiration was not fleeting, it was profound, rooted in genuine respect and recognition of character. He felt a growing determination to find a way to meet her again, to express gratitude fully, and to explore the human connection that had begun to take shape. Days turned into weeks, and the child continued her recovery with steady progress. The father maintained his quiet observation, occasionally encountering the nurse weeks passed, since the nurse had donated blood. Yet the small gesture continued to ripple through the lives of the father and his daughter. The little girl had returned to a semblance of normal life. Her laughter now rang more freely. Her curiosity about the world returned, and she often insisted on visiting the hospital for checkups, just to see the nurse who had unknowingly played a part in her recovery. The father noticed this growing bond and felt a quiet gratitude that went beyond words. One afternoon, the father decided he could no longer wait. He needed to meet the nurse properly, not just in passing during checkups or brief conversations. It wasn't just gratitude, it was a sense of respect and admiration for someone who embodied kindness in such a pure and consistent way. He spoke to the hospital administration, ensuring he would not intrude, and they facilitated a brief meeting, one that was casual but private enough for sincerity to shine through. When he first saw her up close, the father felt a strange mix of nervousness and relief. She was bending over a small patient's bed, tying a ribbon around the child's wrist for a safety bracelet. Her concentration was intense, her gentle hands steady, her posture relaxed yet purposeful. She looked up and noticed him, offering a polite smile, and the father felt the warmth of a connection he hadn't anticipated. He introduced himself, carefully keeping the tone casual, expressing gratitude for her donation and the quiet, unseen support she had given. The nurse, ever modest, waved off his thanks, saying it had been a simple act. She didn't mention the sleepless night she had endured beforehand or the emotional toll that sometimes came with her work. To her, helping was instinctive, a natural extension of her empathy and sense of responsibility. She didn't yet realize the depth of impact her gesture had made, nor did she know the father had spent days quietly thinking about how to meet her again. Over the next few visits, the encounters became slightly longer, filled with small talk, questions about her experience in nursing, and light-hearted stories from her shifts. She spoke about challenges, successes, and the little moments that brought meaning to her work. He listened attentively, sharing his own perspective as a parent navigating fear and responsibility, yet he never mentioned his wealth or social standing. He wanted their connection to grow on human terms, uncolored by material influence. The child, thrilled to see the nurse, often acted as a bridge between them. She would pull at the nurse's sleeve, show her drawings, or ask questions, forcing laughter and warmth into the room. These moments created a natural ease, a rhythm to their interactions that grew more comfortable with each passing day. The father observed quietly, appreciating how the nurse's presence had a calming effect on his daughter. It wasn't just medical skill, it was her genuine care and understanding of a child's needs. Outside of the hospital, the father thought often about her. He wondered how someone could carry so much empathy and patience while still managing the demands of life. He admired her balance, the way she moved through her days with purpose yet remained unassuming. For him, who spent years in high-pressure environments, it was refreshing and inspiring. He wanted to understand her world, to see it firsthand, and to perhaps share moments of his own life, though carefully and without overwhelming her. Meanwhile, the nurse continued her work with unwavering dedication. She faced emergencies, comforted frightened patients, and supported colleagues. Yet in quiet moments she remembered the little girl and her father. She wondered if they were managing well, if the child's recovery remained steady. There was no expectation of recognition, no need for gratitude. For her, the thought that she had helped, even in a small way, was enough to keep her spirits high despite fatigue. As the child's health improved, the father began to create subtle opportunities to extend his connection with the nurse. He would ask questions that required her expertise, casually prolonging conversations, or he would schedule minor appointments that coincidentally aligned with her shifts. It was a careful balance. He did not want to appear intrusive or manipulative. His intent was simple and genuine, to express thanks, to build rapport, and to deepen the connection that had quietly formed over shared concern and mutual respect. The nurse, unaware of the careful orchestration behind these meetings, began to notice his consistency. He appeared reliable, attentive, and respectful, and she found herself enjoying the brief exchanges more than she expected. She noticed the father's concern for his daughter, his gentle demeanor, and the subtle ways he supported her. Though she remained focused on her responsibilities, a small sense of curiosity and interest grew quietly in her heart. One day, during a routine follow-up, the father and nurse found themselves alone in the pediatric wing. The little girl was napping, leaving an unusual quiet. The father expressed his gratitude more openly this time, speaking not just about the blood donation, but about the way she conducted herself every day. He spoke about her patience, her kindness, and the subtle ways she affected people's lives, including his own. The nurse listened, surprised by the depth of his observation, and a quiet connection settled between them. It was sincere, grounded in respect and authenticity, and it lingered even after the conversation ended. After that encounter, both began to notice the small ways in which their lives had intersected. The father found himself checking the hospital schedule for opportunities to see her, while the nurse began to anticipate their brief exchanges with a quiet, unacknowledged pleasure. It was a slow, natural progression, built on human connection rather than circumstance, and it strengthened with each interaction. They began sharing stories about life outside the hospital, carefully keeping boundaries but creating familiarity. She spoke about her family, her quiet joys, and the simple pleasures she enjoyed. He shared snippets about his daughter's personality, their routines, and his challenges as a single parent. Conversations were light yet meaningful, filled with laughter, empathy, and subtle insights. They learned about each other's character, about resilience, and about the value of small acts of care. The little girl often played the role of mediator. She would ask questions, demand attention, or draw pictures to show the nurse, creating moments that allowed the father and nurse to connect naturally. Through these interactions, trust and comfort grew. The nurse began to see the father not just as a concerned parent, but as a man of integrity and depth, someone whose love for his daughter defined him. He in turn began to admire her not just for her professional abilities, but for the kindness and sincerity she brought into every interaction. One evening, after a long day of hospital rounds, the nurse walked to her car, feeling the weight of exhaustion, but also a quiet sense of fulfillment. She reflected on the day, on the progress of her patients, and on the subtle joys that made her work worthwhile. She thought briefly of the father and his daughter, realizing that the small connection they had established was meaningful. Though she couldn't yet place why it lingered in her mind, it was a gentle curiosity, a sense that her path had intersected with theirs for a reason. The father, meanwhile, spent the evening at home, reviewing plans for the next day while thinking about the nurse. His admiration had grown deeper, tempered by patience and respect. He wanted any future connection to be organic, genuine, and built on mutual understanding. He considered ways to invite her into conversations without overstepping, to show gratitude without creating discomfort, and to foster a bond grounded in human values rather than circumstance or status. As days turned into weeks, the rhythm of their interactions continued. The nurse maintained her dedication, attending to the needs of her patients with empathy and professionalism. The father observed quietly, ensuring that his approach remained respectful, natural, and sincere. Both were unaware that the foundation they were building would soon lead to significant moments of realization, moments that would intertwine their lives in ways neither could anticipate. Through it all, the nurse remained grounded in her principles. She worked with a sense of purpose, integrity, and empathy that guided every action. She never sought recognition, never calculated impact, and never considered the consequences of her kindness beyond the immediate moment. Her life was shaped by small acts of care, subtle connections, and the quiet satisfaction of making a difference where she could. The father's perspective was similarly evolving. He had come to understand that admiration and gratitude could exist independently of wealth or status. The nurse's humility and consistency reminded him that human connection was often more powerful than any material possession or social advantage. He was learning to appreciate the depth of character, the quiet courage, and the unseen efforts that define someone's life. Their story, unfolding gradually, was built on empathy, patience, and mutual respect. The nurse's small act of donating blood had set in motion a series of interactions that revealed the power of human kindness, and the subtle ways it could transform lives. The father's careful observation and thoughtful approach created an environment where connection could grow naturally. Without force or expectation, the nurse, unaware of the impact she had made beyond the hospital walls, continued to live her life with quiet dedication, focusing on each patient, each moment, and each act of care. The father, quietly inspired, continued to observe, learn, and consider ways to show gratitude while respecting boundaries. In this way, their lives moved forward, converging slowly, naturally, and meaningfully, and so the foundation was laid. The nurse continued her work with unwavering dedication. The father quietly nurtured his admiration and respect, and the little girl remained the central thread connecting their lives. The stage was set for further developments, moments of realization, and the gradual deepening of relationships that would soon lead to life-changing encounters and heartfelt connections. What had started as a simple act of giving the little girl's laughter had returned fully now, a sound that filled the pediatric wing with warmth. She ran lightly down the hallways under her father's watchful gaze, and sometimes she would pause to wave at the nurse who had become a quiet hero in her life. The nurse, in turn, greeted her with gentle smiles and playful remarks, her calm demeanor making the child feel safe and happy. It was a small circle of connection, built slowly, naturally, and with care. The father noticed the bond forming between his daughter and the nurse. He watched quietly, never intruding, yet feeling a profound sense of respect for her. He admired how she handled children with ease, offering comfort without fuss, patience without frustration. In his world, where decisions were calculated and outcomes were often measured in numbers, this display of human empathy felt rare and precious. He realized that her actions went beyond professional duty. They came from a genuine heart, and that was something money could never buy. One afternoon, the father had an idea. He invited the nurse for a coffee outside the hospital during a break, framing it as a casual conversation to discuss the child's progress. She agreed politely, expecting a brief exchange, a simple thank you gesture that would be done in minutes. But what neither realized was that this simple outing would change the rhythm of their interactions. At a quiet cafe nearby, the nurse and father settled at a small table. The little girl sat beside her father, drawing in a notebook, occasionally glancing up to offer her own commentary. The nurse watched, smiling softly, feeling at ease in a setting so different from the sterile hospital corridors. For the first time, she saw the father not just as a parent or someone grateful for her act, but as a person with depth, humor, and warmth. Their conversation flowed naturally, from child development to shared experiences, each topic revealing glimpses of character, values, and personality. The father spoke about his work, carefully omitting the details of wealth or status, focusing instead on the challenges and responsibilities of raising a child alone. The nurse shared her experiences, the joys and struggles of nursing, and the quiet satisfaction she found in helping others. Laughter arose naturally, stories were exchanged, and a sense of comfort settled between them. Neither felt pressured. Neither felt judged. It was simply two people connecting over shared humanity. Over the following days, their interactions grew more frequent. The father began visiting the hospital under the pretext of checkups or appointments, but always finding time to speak with the nurse. They discussed books, movies, and small aspects of daily life, building familiarity and trust. The little girl remained a central part of these moments, her presence bridging the gap between adult conversations and shared laughter. The nurse, despite her initial reserve, began to notice a subtle change within herself. She appreciated his thoughtful approach, the quiet attention he paid not only to his daughter but to her as well. She recognized a consistency, a reliability that was rare in her interactions with adults outside her profession. There was no sense of expectation, no pressure, only genuine human connection. It was refreshing, comforting, and increasingly meaningful. The father, in turn, felt a growing admiration for her that went beyond gratitude. He noticed the small gestures she made for his daughter, the patience she displayed, the attentiveness in her voice and posture. He admired her resilience, her calm in stressful situations, and her humility. Unlike many people in his world, she did not measure value in wealth, social status, or accolades. Her character was measured in acts of kindness, small moments of care, and an unwavering commitment to what she believed was right. As their interactions continued, small challenges arose. Colleagues and friends questioned the appropriateness of his visits, hinting at social differences, lifestyles, and potential misunderstandings. Yet he and the nurse navigated these gently, maintaining their focus on authentic connection. They established boundaries, respecting each other's lives while allowing natural interactions to occur. The little girl remained the anchor, her joy and innocence reminding them of the importance of honesty and simplicity. One evening, after a long week of hospital work, the nurse walked through the hospital garden, reflecting on her experiences. She thought about the little girl, her laughter, and the small victories that made her exhausting days worthwhile. She also thought briefly about the father. There was a warmth in his presence, a calm that seemed to mirror her own quiet dedication. She found herself anticipating his visits, enjoying the conversations, yet keeping a professional distance. There was a subtle acknowledgement growing between them, one that neither had spoken aloud but both felt. The father, observing the nurse's consistent kindness and professionalism, realized that his admiration had evolved into something deeper. He wanted to be present not only as a grateful parent, but as someone who appreciated her character, her empathy, and her integrity. He found himself thinking about her outside the hospital, planning thoughtful gestures that respected her autonomy while expressing sincere gratitude. It was an approach guided by patience, authenticity, and a desire for connection, not obligation. Their bond gradually deepened through shared experiences. Simple moments, a quiet conversation in a hallway, a coffee break in a nearby cafe, a laugh over a drawing by the little girl, became the foundation for trust and understanding. They learned to navigate each other's lives with care, respecting personal space while allowing genuine emotions to develop naturally. The father's admiration and the nurse's openness created a synergy that neither had expected, but both valued. Meanwhile, the child thrived, her health steadily improving. She grew more independent, playful, and curious. Yet she remained attached to the nurse in a way that was both endearing and telling. She would often run to the nurse, ask for advice, or simply sit close during conversations. Her happiness and growth became a reflection of the connection forming between the adult figures in her life. The nurse and father recognized the importance of this dynamic, ensuring that their interactions supported the child's emotional well-being while fostering trust and respect. Over time, the father began sharing small parts of his personal life with the nurse. Stories from his childhood, experiences as a parent, lessons learned from mistakes and successes. He did so without expectation, simply offering glimpses of himself to build a more meaningful connection. The nurse reciprocated with honesty, speaking about her challenges, dreams, and quiet victories. Their conversations remained grounded in reality, free from pretense and focused on shared humanity, rather than status or superficial considerations. The nurse began noticing subtle changes within herself. She felt a sense of companionship and understanding that was rare in her daily life. She appreciated his thoughtfulness, the way he listened attentively, and the quiet respect he showed. It was a comfort she hadn't realized she was seeking, a gentle affirmation that meaningful connections could grow from simple acts of kindness. She felt drawn to his sincerity and to the genuine care he demonstrated for his daughter and those around him. The father continued to act with patience and discretion. He respected her boundaries, never forcing interactions, and allowed the connection to evolve naturally. He observed her dedication, her resilience, and the compassion she showed to everyone she encountered. Each interaction reinforced his admiration and respect, deepening his desire to build a bond founded on authenticity, mutual understanding, and shared values. As the days progressed, small but significant milestones occurred. The nurse began to trust him more, sharing personal anecdotes and seeking his opinion on parenting and life matters. He, in turn, felt a growing sense of ease, appreciating the openness and honesty she exhibited. The little girl's presence continued to bridge moments of connection, her laughter and curiosity adding a layer of joy and simplicity to their interactions. Through all of this, both maintained a sense of balance. The nurse remained focused on her duties, navigating her professional responsibilities with care and dedication. The father continued his parenting and professional life with the same thoughtful approach, ensuring that his admiration and developing connection with the nurse did not interfere with the child's stability or their routines. It was a delicate equilibrium, sustained through patience, respect, and the unspoken understanding that meaningful relationships require time and trust. As evening fell one day, the nurse and father found themselves walking together after a routine checkup. The little girl held their hands, skipping lightly between them. The conversation was light, filled with laughter and shared observations about the day. It was a moment of simplicity yet profound in its significance. Both adults realized silently that these shared experiences had created a foundation for trust, understanding, and connection that was rare and precious. They reached a small park near the hospital, where the little girl played on the swings. The nurse and father watched quietly, sharing a comfortable silence. It was a space where neither needed to speak, yet both felt a deep sense of connection and mutual respect. They understood without words that their bond had evolved naturally, rooted in kindness, patience, and shared humanity. The little girl's laughter echoed around them, a reminder of the lives they were nurturing together. In the following weeks, the relationship continued to grow subtly. They met during hospital visits, shared meals occasionally, and exchanged stories about life, work, and family. Each moment reinforced the growing trust and respect between them. They remained conscious of boundaries, yet allowed the connection to deepen organically. The father admired her character, her dedication, and her empathy. The nurse appreciated his sincerity, thoughtfulness, and gentle support. The little girl's health and happiness continued to improve, a testament to both medical care and emotional support. The nurse's role in her recovery remained significant, yet the little girl was now fully recovered and back to her usual playful, curious self. She ran through the hospital corridors with the energy of any child her age, her laughter echoing like music in the quiet spaces. She clung to her father's hand when needed, but more often than not she moved freely, exploring and asking questions about everything she saw, and always she sought out the nurse who had, unknowingly, become a pivotal figure in her life. The father watched her, a sense of relief washing over him. Her health had been fragile and the anxiety of those weeks had weighed heavily on him. But now, seeing her active, happy, and smiling, he felt a quiet gratitude that could hardly be expressed in words. The nurse's role in her recovery had been subtle yet profound, and he wanted to acknowledge that properly in a way that went beyond fleeting thanks. One afternoon, he invited the nurse and his daughter for lunch at a small, quiet bistro near the hospital. The nurse hesitated at first, used to the boundaries of professional distance, but she agreed, seeing the father's genuine intent. It was an unusual setting for all of them, away from hospital rooms, schedules, and patients. The little girl sat between them, coloring quietly while the two adults talked. Their conversation started lightly, sharing simple observations about life, work, and family. Slowly it deepened. The father spoke about his responsibilities, the challenges of raising a child alone, and the lessons he had learned along the way. The nurse shared her journey into nursing, her motivations, and the satisfaction she found in helping others. Each spoke with honesty and openness, the walls of formal interaction gradually giving way to a sense of genuine connection. The little girl occasionally interjected with questions or comments, creating moments of laughter and warmth. She drew pictures to show the nurse, who examined them carefully, offering gentle praise. The father observed these moments with a quiet pride, seeing how the nurse's kindness resonated with his daughter. He realized that her influence extended beyond the act of donating blood. She had become a steady, positive presence in their lives. Over the next few weeks, the nurse, father, and daughter shared more time together. They visited parks, walked in quiet streets, and spent afternoons talking in cafes. Each moment, though simple, strengthened the bond forming between them. The nurse found herself appreciating the father's thoughtfulness and consistency, qualities that reflected his genuine care for his daughter and those around him. He in turn admired her selflessness, her quiet strength, and her ability to bring comfort and understanding effortlessly. One day, the father asked the nurse if she would join him and his daughter for a weekend outing. He wanted to show appreciation, not in material terms but through shared experience. The nurse hesitated initially, mindful of personal and professional boundaries, but she agreed. The outing was a simple picnic by a lake, where the little girl played freely while the adults walked along the shore, talking quietly. During this walk, the father spoke about the impact of her kindness, not just on his daughter but on his perspective as a parent. He expressed gratitude in a way that was heartfelt, sincere, and unhurried. The nurse listened, moved by the depth of his words. She had never expected her actions, as simple as donating blood, to have such lasting significance. This moment was a turning point. The connection they had built through patience, respect, and shared concern was now more visible and tangible. The little girl ran back to them, holding a handful of wildflowers. She insisted they sit and admire the flowers, placing them carefully in the nurse's hands. There was a sense of harmony in the scene, a quiet celebration of life, kindness, and human connection. Both adults felt it deeply, a realization that their lives had intertwined in ways that were meaningful and enduring. Back in the city, life continued, yet their connection had changed. The father invited the nurse to occasional events that were casual and relaxed, never formal or imposing. She attended, appreciating the simplicity and authenticity of the moments. Through shared experiences, laughter, and conversation, they began to understand one another more profoundly. Their respect for each other's boundaries and their mutual admiration created a space where trust and understanding could flourish. The nurse began to reflect on her own life, noticing how these interactions had added a new dimension to her experiences. She realized that her work had always been her priority, yet this new connection brought unexpected joy and perspective. She valued the father's integrity and patience, the way he cared for his daughter, and the respect he showed for her independence. It was a relationship built on equality, understanding, and shared humanity. The father likewise found himself inspired by her approach to life. He saw the depth of her character in the quiet consistency of her actions, the empathy she showed to everyone she encountered, and the balance she maintained between personal and professional life. He admired not just her skills, but her values, the principles that guided her every choice and interaction. His admiration grew, tempered with patience, respect, and a genuine desire to nurture the connection naturally. As weeks turned into months, the bond between them strengthened. The little girl thrived, her laughter and energy a testament to the love and care she received from both adults. The nurse's influence on her life was subtle but profound, providing stability, encouragement, and warmth. The father's role complemented this, offering guidance, protection, and insight. Together, the three created an environment of support, trust, and mutual respect. One evening, as the sun set over the city, the father, nurse, and daughter walked together along a quiet street. The little girl held their hands, skipping between them, laughing and pointing at the lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. They paused to watch the sunset, a moment of shared stillness and reflection. Both adults felt the weight and beauty of the moment, a recognition of the journey they had taken together, from a simple act of kindness to a deep, meaningful connection. The nurse reflected on her work and life, realizing that her small decision to donate blood had led to a series of events that enriched her world in unexpected ways. She had formed a bond not only with a grateful parent but with a child whose life she had touched. The father acknowledged the quiet heroism in her actions, the humility, patience, and care that defined her character. Together, they understood that their lives had intersected for reasons beyond coincidence.